Hey kids. Hello kitties, as Cheap Trick would say. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about why it's taken me so long to do all the spells in my game. There's a couple reasons. One's simple and one's a little longer. The first one is I really wanted to look at the effects of the spells and make sure that they kind of jive with like how I viewed the spells. And of course, most of the spells I'm using turn out to be first edition spells, or at least the versions of those. Which I noticed once again to kind of like give props to Lamentations of the Flame Princess. That's what James ended up doing with those. In a lot of cases, I just like those spells better in terms of like how they work, etc. But in some cases, I use the basic spells. Unfortunately, I didn't have a full list or compendium of all the spells from BX itself. So I used the next best thing, which was Dark Dungeons, which is a retro clone of, look, another text, of Rules Cyclopedia, which is from BECMI. And comparing the basic spells to the first edition spells, one of the first things you notice is a lot of the durations are really kind of long, and they're not at all based on caster level. So I really didn't like that. I want them to be based on caster level. I think you ought to get as many perks as possible for being a higher level wizard, and at low levels your spells just shouldn't last as long. The problem I ran into, though, for the most part, was my round length, because in first edition, the rounds are 1 minute long, and whereas in basic they're anywhere from 6 to 10, and mine happen to be 12 seconds. And so, what's the big freaking deal, Ivan? Well, the big deal is, some spells are both combat and utility-based to a certain extent. Let's say that you want to cast protection from normal missiles on yourself or a thief that's going to carry this statue of, like, Galibarak or whatever, past this whole, 700-yard, gate full of all these guys that have bows. Now, if the rounds are 1 minute long, then that's great. He has a chance to make it all the way. If the rounds are 12 seconds long and you're a 7th level wizard, so you can only cast it for 7 rounds, well then now the thief or you are probably going to buy it, because unless you're an Olympic sprinter and incredibly strong, you're just not going to make it all the way over there. However, in a combat situation, if you make it last a number of minutes rather than a number of rounds, then of course the spell lasts a lot longer and becomes a lot more powerful. So what do? So I kind of had to go through spell by spell and decide, well, how utilitarian do I want the spell to be versus how much just combat based I want it to be. And so I invented this great unit of time called the minute. I thought it was pretty brilliant to come up with that idea. So some spells last for a certain number of minutes, and some last for a certain number of combat rounds. And it's just based on how overpowered they would end up being if they were lasted for several minutes. And in the most cases, I erred on the side of letting them last a little longer, because I like people to be creative and use spells in a utilitarian fashion rather than just it's always going to be a combat spell, that sort of thing. But for some, I obviously had to just kind of keep them short and sweet, because otherwise they'd be way too powerful. So that's pretty much it. That's why it's taken so long. But converting spells from one round length to another can be kind of daunting, because you really have to put a lot of thought into what's the net effect of this going to be. So that's it. Have a great one.